this is Mary Baca with Remotely Unique, coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the title of the show today is The Ticking Time Bomb. I have a guest in my studio today. Veronica Torres is here to talk about and tell her life story. I will give a trigger warning. She's going to share some graphic details about her history of childhood trauma, and there's a lot of people that will be impacted positively and not negatively, but it will be triggering for some people. So we want to just put that out there. That's important to say. One of the things that I think is great about the show today is that a lot of times when people think about dealing with their trauma or traumatic past, they think about just the difficulty that will be to do that. I've had a lot of people over the years tell me, why talk about it? That doesn't help. What good is that going to do? And I agree in that just talking about your issues or your traumatic history, that alone is not enough. Just being a holistic practitioner, I think that it's really critical, actually, to clear trauma from the body as well as release it emotionally. But one of the things I want you to remember from today's show is that healing is actually possible. And I think that Veronica demonstrates that fact very powerfully in her story today. She's going to go into detail and share a lot of things. Some of the things she's going to share will be uncomfortable for some of you, but I think it's a powerful story to be told and to be heard, because unfortunately, it's a true story for many, many, many people. I've been a trauma specialist for over 30 years, and in those years, I've heard a lot of people's story in detail. I'm a certified EMDR therapist, which stands for eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing, and certified in several holistic modalities. And so through the years, I've just had the blessing, really, to hear people's story, to have them share that with me and to be a part of their healing, but also just to see the pain along the way. The reward always is seeing the amazing healing that comes with that. And nobody can speak about the amazing trials and tribulations, painful and healing aspects of dealing with trauma than the trauma survivor themselves. So let's get started. Welcome, Veronica, to the show today. Thank you so much for being willing to come on and tell your story.
Hi, yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I am just want to say that I'm so honored to be here with you, Mary, on today's podcast. It is just an honor and privilege to be here with all of you, sharing this story. And thank you for all of you that are going to listen today. And my hope is that as you all are listening, that you will find your own path to healing, because I believe, there's trauma everywhere and it looks very different for everyone. I just want everyone to know this is a very special day for me too, because, well, one, you're going to hear me get emotional, but this is the first time I'm sharing my story publicly. So to my family and my friends, my healing community, thank you for being here, and thank you in advance for your support. So when my journey first started in my path to healing from my childhood trauma, I was just very, very fearful. I didn't know what I was going to look like on the other side, and I didn't know what it was going to bring up. I was so scared to look into those shadowy places, and I didn't even know where to begin. I just knew I was inhibited, and I was living in a very, very, very dark place. And my hope is, my hope is not but my question to all of you is, can you relate to that? And I'm sure there are people out there that definitely can.
What felt dark about the place that you were in? What makes you describe it as that?
I just remember as a young adult, probably about 17, 18, walking around UNM. I was a student there at the time, and I just felt like I had this dark cloud over my head. I distinctly remember the day I was walking across Johnson Field, and I just told myself, it just feels like there's a dark cloud over my head. There was just no sunlight, and I just hated getting up for work. I was a lifeguard at the time, and it was everything I could do to get up and just even go to school or go to work or anything. And I didn't even know what the word depression really meant at the time, but I just knew that I didn't feel good. I didn't feel good at all. It was just a really, really bad place, a bad time in my life.
So you were really severely depressed, it sounds like, at that time.
I was. And what was crazy was, when you're a survivor from abuse, you don't know that you're surviving every day, and that you're invisible, and that you're walking around, and everyone around me, I was still doing pretty good in school. I was going to work, but people didn't know the agony it took me to get there.
Yeah, I think that you're a good example of someone that has trauma issues that fakes it pretty well, right? I mean, sometimes there's a good and bad of that, right?
Yeah.
The good is that you don't have to just wear everything on your sleeve, but the bad is that a lot of people, I think, didn't know that you were in as much pain as you were in.
No, and my family definitely didn't know. I think they knew I was grieving because my parents had just passed. I lost them, my mom when I was 16 unexpectedly, and then my dad to lung cancer when I was 17. So I think that's what everybody was focused on. So if they did see me looking or feeling sad, they just assumed I was grieving my parents. And yes, of course, that was part of it. But there was this whole other part that I don't even think I had identified yet with. I didn't know. I thought I was grieving my parents. And that's when I hadn't come to you yet. It was 10 years away, but I thought it was just, I was depressed because of my parents, that I was orphaned at a fairly young age, as a late teenager. But I didn't know the path I was on, and it could have, heaven forbid, gotten darker. But with, God's grace, I'm a survivor. I could, like you said, there's a good and a bad. I could make it look okay. And I think that kind of kept me going.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times I'll tell people there's not much difference between a doctor that works 90 hours a week and a prostitute in terms of they can both, both are symptoms of trauma or distress, even though the behavior looks different. So, you're like that doctor, right? The successful person in the eyes of the public, and yet just really struggling inside.
Yeah, even now, I mean, I have a thriving career in education. I've been in education for, I think, 22, 23 years now. I danced professionally as a flamenco dancer for almost 20 years in a premier flamenco company here in town. I was an athlete all my life. I swam, I ran track, I did gymnastics, I was a cheerleader. I did all the stuff, right? And my parents were super involved in everything that I did. They were on the booster club. My mom raised money for us to go to nationals. We did all the raffles. They were at every event, choir practice, swimming practice, everything. My parents were always there cheering me on. My dad was the guy who took pictures of everybody. And, and from the outside in, we were, quote unquote, that family that stuck together and went to church and did all the, quote unquote, right things. And my dad, being a track coach himself and a football coach, people adored him in the community. To this day, there are football games played in his name, or track meets ran in his name. And there are trees planted in parks from the baseball team he used to coach at that particular park in town. And he was a narcotics agent with BCSO. But, they didn't know behind the walls when they left the house, because we had parties all the time, right? We had the track team over and the football team over and all the parents. When they left, they didn't know the hell that was going on behind those doors.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because a lot of times we think that trauma exists in those homes that end up with CYFD knocking on their door, and where it's really visible and apparent to the public that there's, abuse going on in a home. But that isn't always the story. That isn't always the case. And so I think, if you could talk a little bit more about that, like just the persona and the facade.
Yeah. So like I was saying, my brother and I were both athletes. My brother definitely better than I. He was a star athlete. Excellent students. We were both on honor roll. We had a nice house. We had nice cars. We did all the right things. But and the reason today's title is A Ticking Time Bomb is that unknown fear all the time. As the clock would tick and I knew Dad was coming home, what kind of mood was he going to be in? Was he going to be sober or drunk? Would he have won a lot of cash at the races that day, or would he have lost everything and be pissed off? And if he was, it was going to be taken out on all of us. And my mom and my brother would try to take the brunt of it. But I had a different experience than them, I think, to my knowledge. But Mine was more sexual molestation and abuse for my father. And at night after night after night after night. And
Do you remember that? And have you always remembered that?
Well, that's what's interesting. You know, as an educator, we go through child abuse training and sexual abuse training every year at the start of the school year, right, to recognize it. And here I was all these years in my, early 20s when I first started teaching, going through those trainings. I never associated it to myself.
Oh, wow.
Because in my mind, what I remembered was my dad showing me pornographic pictures. I remember doing sexual acts with life-size dolls. I remembered the shame. I remember the violence of him punching holes in the wall and tearing down my brother's trophies when he was pissed off. Those things stuck out in my mind. But even like the sexual acts I did with a doll, I thought that was me by myself just doing it. I didn't realize I was being coached. That's the part I didn't remember.
Uh-huh.
And I remember my parents caught me with the doll and looked surprised, but didn't say a word. I'll never forget that night.
How old were you about?
4.
Uh-huh. Oh, wow. Really young.
I was little. And my dad bought me that doll for Christmas and let me open it on Christmas Eve as a special gift. And it even though it was a female doll, it became my boyfriend. And I would talk to my dad about my boyfriend. And I remember us having a conversation about my boyfriend. And I knew what all that was at that young age because we would watch rated R movies that I should not have been exposed to.
Sure.
Pornographic magazines that I should not have been exposed to. He and my mom in sexual acts, photos of them with other couples. Those things are what I had remembered, but because I didn't think I was touched, I thought I wasn't abused.
Right. Yes.
That was my disassociation.
Yes.
Well, every time I went through those trainings at school, I was never touched. I remember the violence. I wouldn't say it out loud, but that's what I thought in my head.
Right. Well, that's part of being a survivor or victim is like justifying, right? Justifying, rationalizing, and then just flat out denial.
I didn't want my dad to be an abuser.
Yeah, sure. Well, and you don't want to probably consider yourself a victim because that's a heavy duty thing to come to terms with.
Yeah, and it wasn't until my brother and we have half siblings. My dad had a teenage pregnancy, married with 3 other kids, and years after they had died, my brother wanted to reach out to our half siblings, and when we did, it brought up a lot of memories and a lot of flashbacks. And they had asked me, "Were you ever abused by our dad?" And I was like, well, I did the thing. I wasn't touched, but I remember the violence. I mean, he was awful to us. I knew he cheated on my mom. I remember seeing these pictures and all this stuff. And then I was talking to a friend about it. We were at Lottaburger, right? I was telling him the story. And I said, yeah, I wasn't touched, but I remember seeing magazines and pictures. And he just looked at me. He said, Veronica, that's abuse.
Yes.
He was priming you. And I remember my knees went weak. My gut felt like it just fell out onto the floor. And I said, take me home right now. And all of a sudden I was a victim. And that label was put on me. And I'll never forget that day.
How old were you at that point?
I was in my early 30s. So I had suppressed a lot of it. And even though I still didn't remember being touched yet, I started to talk more to my aunts and my brother and my half siblings and just ask them, what do you remember? And my oldest half sister, she was full on raped, and it would happen at night. He would bust through the door, hop on her and rape her and leave her there. And she was a teenager, like probably 15 or 16, I think. And then my next eldest sister, she remembered my dad fingering her while she was taking a nap one day. And she justified it as, oh, that's what grownups do. He thought I was, the mom, his wife. And so she had justified it. And then at one point, they had called CYFD on my dad when I was 12.
Oh.
But I didn't know them. They just took it upon themselves because they thought she's getting to an age where we were abused. We better say something. And we had no relationship with them because after my eldest sister spoke up about the rape happening, they just shipped her off. My mom, you're lying. Everyone thought she was lying except my aunts who were her age. They tried to protect her and locked themselves in the bathroom with her at my grandma's house. And my dad was trying to bust in there. And they basically just shipped her back to her mom, which probably saved her life. But when I started to hear those stories, I thought it brought back more memories. I was like, oh, nighttime. All of a sudden, I remembered getting hot lemon tea at night. Well, now I know that was like Theraflu or NyQuil tea.
Oh.
So I would sleep.
Wow.
I remembered waking up in my own throw up and not knowing why. I remember waking up with my panties around my ankles and I had crust down my legs and I thought I'd wet the bed. And I was about in 4th grade. He was probably fondling me. And then I started to think, oh, that's why I don't like intimacy. That's why I'm having issues with sex. That's why I have body triggers. The pieces of the puzzle started to come together. I still don't have the memories of the nighttime stuff, but my body knows. That's the thing about trauma, everybody. Your body remembers.
Yeah. The good thing is you don't have to remember it all, because I think that's part of the hesitation a lot of times for people is they're like, I don't want to remember anything I don't remember. And the truth is you don't have to remember in order to heal.
No, and that's a my testament today is that I didn't, and I still don't remember all of it. And I know that I don't have to heal. And that's thanks to you and your team here and my whole healing community that works with me all the time. And it takes a village, you guys, if you know. It's not just one therapist. Mary has referred me out to acupuncturist, massage therapist, yoga trauma therapist to all help me with my healing. So that's my healing community. And what I want my message to be today is, yes, talk therapy will heal our minds, but it doesn't heal our bodies all the time. And sometimes we need that supplemental healing with holistic energy work or acupuncture, massage therapy, yoga therapy. All those things really play a part in encompassing your whole body healing.
Talk about what talk therapy has done for your healing, and then what the energy work and other alternative therapies have done.
Yes, so talk therapy to me is almost like journaling, where I get my words out. And I can vent, I can be angry, I can start to show emotion, I can be sad, I can cry. Because that was the thing about my trauma too, is when your body experiences so much, you start to learn to be numb. So, as a little girl, your body can't take the pain that he was doing to me and all the things that were happening. So I knew how to be numb real fast, and I knew how to look healthy. So when when you would bring it up in session and we would talk about it, it was, I left with a sense of relief, because there was like that small monkey came off my back a little bit because I could tell somebody. Right. And that's what my little girl, you'll hear me refer to her today, you guys, in 3rd person a lot, because I feel like she is that person, that little person that went through the trauma, and she didn't deserve that. And so I'm here to give her voice back. And so today I just want to tell her story and let you guys know that these kids are so resilient and they are so strong. And they know how to deal with so much, that even when CYFD was called, she protected her dad. They came to my school. I was in middle school, and she protected him. She said that it was all lies. And inside, she wanted to say yes to all the questions they were asking. Yes, we walk on eggshells in our house. Yes, my dad has a temper. Yes, he's violent. Yes, he's hit us. Yes, I've seen my brother covered in blood. Yes, I've heard him call my mother a fucking whore or a fucking bitch and throw dishes on the table. And when she would or on the floor and break them all. And when she would go to pick him up, he would say, "You wait, bitch, till I tell you to do that." And she would sit there and wait. And then he would go, "Okay, dog, now do it." And she would get down. Yeah. And I remember being so little. I was probably like 5 or 6. And I remember so angry. I was so angry. I wanted to hit him, scream him, stab him. Even then, I wanted to kill him. And, but you had to stay quiet. You couldn't say anything. So I would just go numb. So in talk therapy, getting to use my voice and even speaking for her, my little girl, was truly beneficial in just being able to be like a vocal journal to a therapist. And that's what I think helped me the most, is to clear my mind and sort through the mystery, because it's so confusing. It's so confusing because, as you know, predators don't just charm the victim, they charm the community. Yes. So if the victim ever speaks, he was, this beloved cop and coach and
all that goes back to the facade, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Your parents did everything, quote unquote, right in the eyes of the community. And so, probably the public would not have believed you.
No, they didn't believe my sister. And then when my mother, tried to help hide it, she knew what was going on. But she was scared. I mean, I don't know her story. I never got to really, truly speak to her about the abuse. There was just things I remember that she would say and questions that I still have of why didn't you get us the hell out of there? And I'm sure she was scared. And I get to talk to her brothers and sisters, and they talk about the experience of them trying to hide us. And we ran away several times. I only remember one of the times, but my brother remembers more, of course, being older. But my dad was an agent. One of his friends would see us, or he'd see us, and he'd go back and charm her and promise it was not going to happen again, and everything was going to be fixed, and I'm going to stop drinking, and I'm going to do this and that, and that, it lasts for a couple of weeks, and then it was right back to where we were.
And she would stay. Why do you think she stayed?
I wish I knew. I actually got to ask his ex-wife one time, how did you get away? How did you escape? And she said, I grabbed my kids, I ran to California, and I didn't even tell my mom where I was going. And I remember having those conversations with my mom. Mom, let's go, let's move, let's do this. We just won't tell him where we're going. And she said, he'll kill grandma and grandpa. He'll kill your aunts and uncles, because that's what he would threaten to do. And I remember being in the car with him one time and sitting outside of my grandma's house. He's like, should I drive through the front wall? Should I just drive through it? Like a game. And he was drunk. And my brother and I were like, well, no, no, don't do that. And I was so little. And he was like, come on, let's ram the house. And like, no. So I know we were scared. And at the same time, there's stories of my mother being abused when she was a kid, possibly by a priest. My uncles and aunts have told me that. We don't know if it's true. All of us were just trying to, as a family, heal and piece together all the pieces of the puzzle. But that's one that could have happened. And obviously back then, you definitely didn't tell if you were abused by a priest. And you definitely didn't go to therapy at all. You didn't tell your story. So I don't know if that's another reason why the abuse continued with my mom marrying a man like my dad. He was also crazy charming. And my extended family that is hearing this story for the first time is probably thinking, where the heck is this coming from? Like, we knew your dad was a badass, and we knew he beat up people and took out all kinds of guys at the bars and stuff like that, but we didn't know this. Or maybe they did and they didn't tell me.
Well, yeah, that denial, runs usually through the whole family system. I mean, yeah, who knows? You may not know, but so who did know? Anybody?
My mother knew. I know my mother knew about my oldest sister. I know she knew how he got fired from the department. He was on an arrest, and he raped the man he was arresting. He raped his wife in front of him, and it went to court, and it was in the papers. I don't even think I was born yet, because my brother just barely remembers, and he and I are about 5 years apart. But my mother hid evidence for him, and so did his mother hid evidence for him so that he would get off. So he basically got a slap on the wrist. He was also very politically connected, and in the 60s, 70s, in those times, these guys got away with it. One of the reasons I think my mom didn't leave too was, what if he would have gotten sole custody of us if she would have divorced him and found us? Then we would have been with him alone. So that's entered my mind too. And then if she was abused, maybe she had a dark side. And, I think she played a part on both ends. And
What do you mean by that?
well, there was one time I remember I was probably 4. I don't know how it started. It's kind of a flashback, but I was sitting on my dad's lap, and he grabbed my hair and pulled it back. It was like torture. It was waterboarding, basically, but he was pouring beer down my throat. And I was choking and gagging, and I remember my brother being on the couch just like hiding behind my mom, scared, and I was going, please stop, and I was gagging and choking, and he was pouring it and laughing, and like, I don't know, I just remember flailing, and my mom was laughing with him. And then afterwards, she gave me cigarettes, and she was like, smoke these and put these to your lip and do this, and she would give them to me.
And you were how old?
4, 5.
Wow.
And then they gave me wine all the time. There was wine in the house. My mom would open a bottle or something, and I'd have a glass, and she'd have a glass. And then, for those of you who remember Bella Vista, we'd be at banquets and stuff, and I was real little. And I would go around and drink everyone's wine. And, the adults were all laughing and talking, and they wouldn't notice, but I loved it. And then I'd crash out and fall asleep, and then he could do whatever he wanted, and I'd wake up in a different state that I was in when I went to bed.
It's amazing you don't have a substance abuse issue.
Yeah. In fact, what was crazy is as I got into high school and, kids start drinking at parties and all that business. First of all, I wasn't allowed to go. The control thing, right? My dad kept me pretty close at home and was, quote unquote, strict with us. That's what it looked like to the outside world. And the inside, it was just controlling us. But I never drank. I would always just volunteer to be the designated driver for my friends in high school and college. I don't think I started drinking till I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s. And it was a glass of wine with dinner. Like my family knows today, I don't think I've never really been drunk or anything, but I like to have a glass of wine with my dinner, or we go to happy hour, have a couple of drinks, but I've never been one to drink, smoke, do drugs, any of that stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
I didn't want to be out of control of my body. That was my survivor. Something in me knew I wanted total control when I walked out of the house, especially after my parents had died, because I really felt alone. And, my brother was gone 3 or 4 days a week working. So I was really by myself in the house as 16, 17, 18-year-old. And so I made sure I was in control of my body. I didn't like being dizzy. I didn't like that feeling.
Yeah, that's out of the ordinary, because you had the sexual abuse, the other kinds of abuse, and then substance use, right, inflicted upon you. So that's boy, you escaped that bullet, right?
Yeah, that was truly a miracle. I have no idea how I escaped it or what, but I just knew in high school, I didn't want to drink.
What about other kinds of addictive or compulsive behavior?
That I have?
Yeah. Have or had?
Have or had. The biggest thing I think is control. Planning out my day, it's got to go exactly how I wanted. I mean, it's better now, but if it didn't, I would go off the deep end. If things didn't go exactly right on the list that I had for that day, or I didn't get the things I wanted to get done, that would cause me, where some people are like, oh, I'll get that done tomorrow. Like, that's not a big deal. It was a big deal to me. It would cause panic attacks. It would cause anger. Or if I didn't eat at certain times during the day, that I'm still kind of dealing with. But, and I never had an eating disorder per se of like anorexia or things like that, or bulimia. But I wanted to eat when I wanted to eat. And I was nervous not to have food when I wanted it and when I needed it. And because I was an athlete, that was important to me. That's how I guess disguised that, and still do in some ways. And then being a dancer and an athlete, my body, I would say I'm a workaholic, that I have to work. And whatever that work looks like, it can be at, my job in education. It can be I'm, at the gym, or I'm at yoga, or things like that. But I'm constantly doing, because when I pause, I think. And I don't want to think sometimes. So that's why still to this day I have sleeping pattern issues, because when the world slows down and it's dark outside, my light turns on in my head and I start overthinking. That's the other issue I have, is I overthink a lot of things, where I self-talk now and just tell myself, hey, that's not a big deal. You didn't get that done today. It's okay. Keep it going. So through the holistic therapy and the talk therapy that you've given me, that's helped those things calm down. I mean, I think they're still present in some ways, but and you can tell this is it's a lot better than it used to be, I think, when you first met me 20 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I also think that that's an important thing for the listeners to hear, is that working on sexual abuse issues is not just, and sometimes not ever, about talking about the sexual aspect of the abuse. That there's so many fallout issues, right, like control, that you can work on and make great strides in, because I think that's a thing that people fear when they have sexual abuse issues, is they're going to go to therapy and have to talk about all these details about the sexual abuse. And the truth is what?
I don't think I've ever talked about the details.
Right.
I think you're probably hearing some details that you've never heard before, and
Absolutely.
I've known you for 20 years.
Yeah.
But when you're doing energy work on me, you get downloads, right? You're getting those.
Right.
And there are times where you're like, okay, I'm not going to share what just came up, because you don't need to know, but we're going to clear it.
Right.
And I may feel things, I may be emotional, but I don't remember. And sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe she should tell me. Maybe I kind of want to, because curiosity kills the cat,
Sure.
right? So I want to know. But at the same time, I'm like, do I really want to know? I really don't want to know.
Yeah.
It's better if you just get it off.
Well, and plus you lived it. Like whether you
Yeah.
consciously remember or not, some aspect of your being, your body always remembers because the body never forgets.
Yeah.
And then your mind remembers quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so it's like you don't need to be told that story.
No.
Right? There are just some things that, man, if you can have any kind of therapy, whether it's body work or therapy, and not have to walk through that quicksand at times, right? Then
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah. The other thing I learned through the therapies is afterwards, even though I didn't remember, I would purge. And I learned what a healing crisis was. I never knew that before. I'd never heard that term. And I think one of your therapists told me, like, you may go home and have a healing crisis. I'm like, what is that? Well, you may cry, you may laugh uncontrollably, you may want to scream, you may have flu-like symptoms, you may have a fever. Let it happen. You're not sick. And thank God she told me that, because I went home after the yoga trauma therapy we did together, where it was one-on-one. I purged the whole weekend. It took me 3 days.
Right. And although that doesn't always happen for people.
No, and that's in fact, I think the only time it happened that severe, and when I say severe, I don't mean that in a bad way. I actually mean that in a very good way, because that's the other thing. I hated to cry. I didn't want anyone to see emotion on me, because that's what we were taught. And that's what even my dad would do to us was like pain tolerance tests, and more so on my brother, where he would like squeeze his wrist, and my brother was maybe 3 or 4, and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze in public. And don't you cry. Do not cry. Do not show an emotion. Do not shed a tear. If my brother was injured in a football game, had a concussion or a knee injury, it was get your ass back in that fucking game right now. And he would look at him from the stands and just had to give him the look. And my brother knew, I better go back out there. To the point where his concussion was so bad, one time he actually ran the wrong way on the field. And everybody was laughing and everyone thought it was funny, but I wasn't laughing because, he was hurt.
Yeah. How was that to watch your sibling, your only sibling, right? Your full,
Right.
You have half sisters and brothers, I think. But, what was that like? Because that's also
Horrible.
another part of the victimization.
Oh, horrible. Horrible. Like I said, mine happened in my sleep at night. As a teenager, it was the shame and guilt of when I wanted a boyfriend. You just want to fuck him. You're not allowed to have boyfriends. You just have hot pants. You just want this or that. But my brother, it was the opposite. It was popularity. You better be popular. You better have, the hottest girl in school. You better have the best grades. You better win every race. And if he didn't, the walls were torn down. Glass was broken. My brother was beaten. He was bloody. He was battered. And he could not hit back. He could not fight back. And my brother is a very tough man. Very big, very, star athlete, football player, all those things. But he better not fight back. And what my mom would do is she would run me to my grandma's house. I wasn't allowed to tell my grandma what was happening. She would just run me over like I was just going to spend the night with grandma. And she went back and her and my brother would, quote unquote, handle it. And there were times where she would slip sleeping pills into my dad's beer after the abuse, and the house would be torn down so that he would go to sleep so that we could clean. And she could bring me home and we'd clean the house and she'd feed us and put us to bed. And then she would deal with him however she dealt with him.
You don't know that part.
No, I don't know that part.
Wow. That's incredible. What about your brother? Like, does he know about your abuse?
Yeah, I don't know how much he knows. We've talked quite a bit over the years when it comes up, and both of us have spoken to you at one time when I invited him into a session, as you know. I don't think he likes hearing it, of course. Who wants to hear about their little sister going through hell? And I think one of the things is that he felt helpless. As I felt helpless to him and my mom, I think he felt helpless to me. He at one point he adopted 2 huge Dobermans, and he made sure they slept with me at night. And at the time, I didn't even know why. And those dogs would growl every time my dad would open the door to my bedroom, even just to like, quote unquote, check on me, just checking good night. And I never, it's funny because I didn't remember the abuse, but I never wanted to say good night to my dad. I didn't want to hug him. I didn't want to love on him. I hated him. And I would even write that on my little chalkboard in my room. I had a little chalkboard, and I would write, I hate dad. And my mom would go, erase that right now. Your dad's going to come home and see it. And we're all going to be in trouble. Erase it right now. And I wanted a part of him to see it. I was the mouth. I was kind of the brave one. And I think that saved me, because there were times where I was like, I remember after my mom died, I was making dinner, and he came in and he was willing his cancer back in him, because he was in remission when my mom died, and then his cancer came back from depression, all the business, because he was now the victim, right, because my mother had died. And he came in the kitchen, and I was cutting meat, and he said, you know, Veronica, I just want you to know your mother and I had the most beautiful marriage. I never cheated on her, and we just loved each other. True narcissist, right? Mm-hmm. And I turned around with a knife in my hand, and he saw my face change, and I remember his face changed. And I said, are you kidding me? You think we don't know? I remember women. I remember sneaking around and watching you with other women at football parties with other moms. You would take me to their work to go pick them up the next day and act like they were your friend. Like, you don't think I know? You know, mom told us what you did. Mom told us you would bring women over and have them right in front of her when she was pregnant with my brother. She told us some of those stories of what happened before we were born. Like, you think we don't know? And I just remember he went pale. And my brother came in the kitchen. He goes, what's going on? And I said, Dad thinks they had a beautiful marriage. And all my brother did was he looked at me and he said, go to your room. And so I shut the door, and I remember my brother gave it to him. That was the first time my brother spoke out to my dad. Otherwise, it was yes sir, no sir, stand at attention, do not show emotion on your face. But that night, my brother had his way with him a little bit and got to say finally, I think, what he needed to say. And I don't even know how my dad reacted. I stayed in my room, didn't come out until the next morning. I don't think my brother and I ever talked about it at that time. And but I was so proud of him. I was like, oh, thank God, someone finally said something to this guy.
Yeah. How old were you and your brother at that point? Adults.
I was 16, so my brother was 21.
Still really young.
Yeah, just entered as a first responder. Just became a first responder, and to this day, I'm like, that's one of my proudest moments. From all the trophies my brother won, that was the one. That was the moment where he finally had his voice, even if it was just for an hour. I don't even know how long it went on, but I was so proud of him. Thinking, I remember being behind the door, like fist pumping to myself, like, yes, give it to him. Say this and say that. So it was finally a time for him to say something.
And could you hear what was being said?
Yeah, I heard a lot of it. I heard a lot of it. Of course, I had my ear pressed to the door.
Big old glass.
With the dogs, just in case. But yeah, my, when my mom unexpectedly died of an aneurysm and I was 16, it was over spring break. And it was, again, knowing how to handle trauma at such a young age, not knowing why I knew how to handle it, but it was Friday of spring break. She went down at work. We got called to the hospital. I walk in, my family's crying. I don't know what's going on. They had said she had a seizure, but they didn't really know. And they said she's not responding. They were preparing her to put her on life support and take her up to ICU. And I remember walking in there and seeing her on that machine, and I just dove on her bed. And I was like, don't go, don't go. And my dad said, son, take care of your sister. And he couldn't take it because she was the lifeline. He could control and be an asshole and do what he did. And because us three were in our place on his little game board, that was his lifeline. But the second that lifeline was cut, the second she died and we had to unplug her. So it was Friday she went down. We unplugged her on Tuesday. We had her funeral on Thursday. It was Good Friday, Easter Sunday. I went back to school on Monday morning.
Wow.
As if nothing happened. I just walked into school. And no one knew, because at that time there was no social media. So unless a parent read it in the paper and told their kid, no one at school knew. I just, went to school. And then one of my teachers pulled me aside and they were like, is this your mom? And I was like, yeah.
You can find this segment on our YouTube channel, Remotely Unique, on our website, remotely-unique, on iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Thanks a lot. You have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care of yourself and each other.